This is Voices in Validation, brought to you by IVT Network. IVT Network is your expert source for life science regulatory knowledge. Voices in Validation brings you the best in validation and compliance topics. We interview industry experts from pharma, biotech, med devices, and laboratories. Here is the host of Voices in Validation, Stacey.
Thank you, and welcome to another episode of Voices in Validation. So glad you're here to join us this week as we talk about the new norm for life science talent evolution. And it seems we're in this era of the great resignation, or so they're calling it. So now, more than ever in recent history, employees have the advantage. And this is true across regulated industries as well. Unfortunately, the amount of training and experience necessary in maintaining GMP standards, delivering quality products, and patient-first service means this can be especially challenging in this environment to recruit, hire, and retain. So here to provide some guidance, both for hiring managers and employees in navigating this volatile job environment, is Justin Bechtel of Bechtel Recruiting Group. So welcome, Justin. So great to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Stacey. I know this is the second time we're chatting, and really enjoyed the first time. Looking forward to this one as well.
Yeah, no, it's going to be great. And we're looking forward to your insights on this topic, because so many people are moving jobs, changing jobs, looking to progress in their career. So, and then of course, hiring managers are always in need of excellent talent. So this should provide some great information for our listeners. And with that being said, I'm just going to have you kick us off by painting a picture of the current HR environment within life science industry.
Sure. So I think it's sort of a weird time to be in HR within life sciences, because we're seeing a lot of shifts. We're seeing booming technology. Sorry, excuse me. We're seeing booming technology across the life sciences, whether it's treatments for cancer, or new stents for cardiovascular surgery. It just doesn't matter what it is, whether it's medical device, biotech, or pharma. We're seeing an industry that just take off. But because they're new, there is no talent to match those roles. So you sort of have to take this hybrid understanding of GMP along with whatever niche market you have, and obviously have to maintain that standards of quality. So I think HR is pulling their hair out a little bit because they don't really know where to go. And people are willing to pay now. 10 years ago, it might not have been the case, but now people are really paying a premium for people who know what they're doing. And I think people who then also get the emotional intelligence side of things when it comes to managerial roles. So I think HR is doing their best to see where they can evolve with this market. And again, just a shortage overall because of how fast we are growing as an industry, again, spanning everything from medical devices to pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of competition from outside the industry too for some of these positions, as you mentioned, the ones that are maybe utilizing more of the high-tech skills, the digitalization, the computer systems, validation type people. They have options, and they have options outside of life sciences. So it's for the HR managers, sometimes it's building or creating that compelling story and reasons for people to choose life sciences over another industry, perhaps. So just throwing that in, because that can be another challenge. But let's focus a little bit on the employers for the moment. How can they, as employers, start attracting high quality talent?
So I think there's two different buckets that we have to place employers in. First, you've got your smaller startups that you're going to be under 100 employees. And a CEO, C-suite level is going to have their hands in everything. A lot of times you'll have someone at that level interview everyone walking in the door. That makes sense, right? Right. Again, that's assumed that a smaller company would do something like that. When it comes to larger companies, you're not going to have the same thing. You're going to look at the BMSs or Mercks or Eli Lilly's or whatever it is. And while they may provide guidance for the company as a whole, they're never going to have their hands in everything. So let's start with the smaller companies. Smaller companies, I think you can pitch culture. I think that's a big deal. Yeah. I think with these smaller companies, you can do things that at a a freight ship can't do. A tugboat can and a freight ship can't. So you've got smaller companies who can very much mold their culture, and sort of, if tomorrow we want to do, this is stupid, but a fantasy football league, as a company, we
Yep.
do it, right?
Yep.
While a BMS or a Merck just can't do that. So I think CEOs of smaller companies have to begin to find that individual valuing of employees, and begin to integrate that into every part of their work culture. Biopharma does not lend itself to work-life balance. It just doesn't. And I don't know if it ever will. I remember sitting with an employer and they said, if your applicant says they want work-life balance, they're not the right one for us. It almost offended me initially, because I was like, I'm sorry, what do you mean? Like, work-life balance, that's integral to everyone, right? And they were just saying, no, like right now we're trying to save lives. And so that's just the way it is. So as a smaller company, I think you can begin to jump into different initiatives and culture changes. But as a larger company, it gets really, really hard. What can an employer do to begin to retain and look at talent? And I think it starts with, and this is really interesting, but I think it starts on the HR and recruiting side of things, of these company recruiters becoming advocates for great applicants, and sort of going to the ops team or the admin teams and saying, look, I know this is what our salary range says is, but this guy's he's going to change the culture in that department or in that specific team. So we got to go up and beyond for him. But it doesn't happen if it's just resumes and it's just salary ranges and it's just this cookie cutter approach. And unfortunately, in large companies, that just doesn't work all the time. If someone tries to swim against, go upstream, they just get shot down right away. So it's really hard for employers. I think smaller companies have more of an advantage, but for larger companies, I think it has to come from the top down. And again, it's like turning a freight ship. It's going to take a lot of time.
Some great points made there. Do you feel like, just to add on to that a little bit, because you talked about the work-life balance, which I think is especially important to millennials and the next generation of employees coming up the pike, right? Do you feel like that's really going to hinder the industry as a whole from gaining new talent? If we continue to have this opinion or this thought process that says, work-life balance is not achievable here in biotech or in life sciences, because I was a little surprised, as you were, when you heard that.
Sure. I think we have to become creative in ways that I think we can find workarounds. So if I'm working a 4-day week and I'm doing 50 hours a week, 12-hour shifts, I get 3 days off. Maybe that starts evening it out, right? I get a little more downtime. Maybe we look at stuff like, instead of giving 17 days PTO, we look at 31. I mean, that's crazy. That's 6 weeks off a year. But what if we looked at the amount of hours people are putting in, the amount of burnout and the amount of turnover? And I think that's where we don't do a good job as employers. I think we don't actually see what the bottom line is. We assume what's always been the case. And we say, well, I'm paying them an extra $12,000. And this is, 107 employees that are going to get this $12,000 raise. And so we're looking at $1 million. It doesn't make sense. But no, now if you look at your training and your costs of someone walking out the door and then bring them back in, it would dwarf that $1 million. So, and that's just, again, just off the top of the head, there's no backing study to that. But if we looked at things like that, I think it would change the way we approach work-life balance. And, I'm a new dad. It would be crazy for me not to be able to see my son 5 days a week. That's just not going to work for me. And I don't care what you offer me. If you don't give me that, I wouldn't work with you. It's just not going to happen. So, but if you said to me, look, we see your pain here and we want to give you 3 days off a week and we're going to give you an extra, week and a half of PTO, I'm going to consider it, because I'm going to say, you see me, like you get where I'm coming from. And, if someone who's been a dad, let's say, looks at me and says the same thing, I think we start seeing. But again, the difficulty with that is, if you have a freight ship and someone says that, they're going to be like, no, it's just not going to happen. So you have to do it up front. It has to be in a contract as you're walking into a new job.
Yeah. And I think to that point, a shift that large is going to take time, right? Yeah. When you're in a larger company, it's almost like you have to create the culture around that thinking first, and then you'll start to see some change. And I hope that we get there as an industry, because we definitely need some of this young, fresh talent coming our way. So, sticking on the employee focus for employer, focus for a couple more minutes. It seems like we've really expanded our talent pool in terms of geography since the normalization of remote work, right? So the pandemic did have some upsides, and this is one of them. Do you feel like this helps or hurts the hiring process within the regulated industries?
I think one thing that I'm seeing, and so I start really early on in this process, but um, I'm on the East Coast. You and I were chatting about this a couple of days ago. I'm in New Jersey, and the price tag for living is through the roof. It's wild. You could buy a mansion in Pennsylvania for what you'd pay for a small house in New Jersey, right? And so cost of living is a major deal. So if we're looking at the East Coast, where there is a good amount, you look at Boston, you look at Jersey, you look at North Carolina doesn't really hit that mark. They have a,
I'm there.
yeah, exactly. Maryland, exactly. So in those areas, you're seeing a high cost of living, thus offerings for salaries are going to be higher. If you look at other hubs, let's say in the Midwest or even the South, staying away from the West Coast, cost of living there is much less. Thus, salaries, you're going to see a pretty sharp decline. So if we were to introduce remote work at an East Coast salary, but a Midwest cost of living, you immediately attract very high talent, because you're going to offer someone a pay scale that they've never seen before, or we could talk, 20, 25, 30%, and yet they're staying remote. So that I advocate 100% for the roles that you can go to places where people, let's say the cost of living is less, and you can up their standard of living by a good amount, and you get high quality. So I think that's like a cheat code that we haven't really tapped into yet. But on the other side, I think the difficulty becomes with remote work is we're in manufacturing and we're in life sciences, and you got to have hands-on things. When we talk about validation, sure, let's say there's some CSV roles where you can do everything remotely and you can get on a call with your team. But then when you jump into, CQV of specific manufacturing lines, and you've got to be there hands-on, and you've got to see the equipment, and you've got to run tests, and you got to go through your 3 testing runs, and it's just not going to work. And I think what employers get worried of is if they advertise remote and someone walks on, then they ask them to come in, they look at them like they've got 3 heads, well, you told me this was remote, And so what I'm finding is, just with my experience, is employers will say 100% on site, even if it is 60-40 remote, because they don't want to take the chance of offering you something that they can't live up to. And I think that's great. I think that's a good way to approach it many times. But I think both sides have to become a little more flexible. Like, sure, let's be upfront that for now we're going to go 50-50. We're being careful with COVID. But also we live in a manufacturing world, and where you got to have hands-on things. You got to have people with eyes. You can't just do this virtually and remotely. So to plug in remote workers where it can be done, 100%. But I think our industry is hurt heavily because we are a manufacturing industry and we're so heavy hands-on with a lot of our roles. So does that sort of answer the question? I realize I wouldn't.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that makes sense. I think where we can have hybrid roles, like, so maybe there's certain activities that can be done remotely, but other activities that require in-person interventions or activities, then for sure. I feel like that's probably the way that most industries are going. But for certain, in manufacturing and highly regulated manufacturing, such as pharma and medical device, there is going to be less opportunity for that than in other industries. So, Justin, we know that one of the hardest parts about growing a team comes, long after the hiring is done. It's retaining those people and keeping them happy and engaged. And so, to meet the needs of your highest quality talent, what can you as an employer do or provide that will make a difference here?
I think something we overlook by mistake, and I probably specifically or more poignantly in in pharma is everything is so busy. We're running, lines 24/6 or 24/6 and a half, and then doing those 12 hours of maintenance. And everyone's got a job to do, and everyone's got someone above them that's telling them to get the job done faster. And so I think we lose our, and again, this sounds almost wimpy, but I don't think it is. I think it's something we've lost in our culture. I think valuing the individual is overlooked. How many times have we had, let's say, a boss or something walk in and go, man, you're doing a fantastic job. And you just walk around the entire day with your head held higher. But I think because everyone's so busy, you just don't get that. And so your culture is just work. And it's just, we got to do this faster and we have to do this more efficiently and we have to do this with higher quality. And of course, we're saving lives. So I get it. It's not like this is something that's far-fetched. It's not just about money. We are saving lives here. But I think going back to the valuing, if you have a supervisor who walks in and just is constantly uplifting his team, it's like, man, you guys are fantastic. Like, you guys are the end all. I think we'd be surprised at how many people wouldn't leave their jobs. I really do. Because yes, money is a big deal. And yes, living, in a house or something nicer is fantastic. And a lot of people are going to look for that. But I think we don't put a premium on that culture of a team. So I think one thing that employers really should do, and especially again at the smaller companies, is begin that culture of truly valuing the individual, because I think we would see high retention rates with that, really, really high retention rates. And I think what valuing the individual says is, if you ask for a $7,500 increase in pay, I don't just write you off, but I actually look into it. I was talking with someone recently who saved their company hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they asked for a bonus, and the company was like, guys, we just can't do it. And they're like, okay. And they walk out the door. And, you say common sense says hundreds of thousands of dollars versus a $20,000 raise, just so that they can live. And they were in New Jersey, so everything's so pricey. So I think in the same way, I think sometimes we just, we all fall prey to it, but I think we just look at the standards. This is what Glassdoor says the salary should be. This is what our HR department has given us as a range, but we don't see that that person has put in an extra 27 hours, and walked in on a Saturday night to fix a line. So I think as employers, we have to do a better job of valuing those that we've hired and that we should inherently be serving as a leader. But I think also putting like practical steps to that. I can say I value you, but if I don't get you a birthday gift, I don't really value you. You know what I'm saying? So I think in the same way, like if I ask for, a $4,000 bonus goes a long way with new hires and stuff that's very small to a company on the bottom line, but will retain talent for a long time. And then just on the technical side of things, sorry, I'm waxing eloquent on this one, but I think what they're doing is they're bringing relocation packages in and sign-on bonuses that will lock you into a 2-year stint. And I think there's wisdom on both sides, because that gives upfront something to someone who's looking for a new opportunity and relocates them and gives them a new start in a new company and a promotion, the whole 9 yards, but then also locks them in for that 2 years. So the employer is now promised that employee for 2 years, and the employee is given something that, let's say a 10K sign-on bonus and a full relocation to the East Coast and, a bonus yearly. And so I think both sides go, wow, this is fantastic for both of us. So I think finding that line is a cool place.
I would agree. And to take the whole idea of valuing your employees, I 100% concur that is probably one of the most important things in terms of retention and in terms of happiness for your employees, is to feel that everybody at the end of the day wants to feel like they have some value, like they're appreciated for what they do and what they give to the company. And I think when you have, to your point about it needing to come from the leaders or the management team, I think that if they are consistently doing that, appraising their employees, highlighting the successes, cheering the wins, the entire team starts to take on some of those traits, and then in turn, hey, praising each other or valuing each other, as well as just, from the top down, but then it starts to be the culture. Yeah. And I think that from my experience has been super important in terms of employee happiness and their willingness to stay. And I agree. When you hear something like that come from your boss, you do hold your head a little higher and you feel better about what you're doing on a daily basis. So let's shift for a moment from the employer focus and talk a little bit about the applicants and or employees. How can I leverage this shift to employee control to my benefit if I'm an applicant, and how do I choose the job that's right for me?
So I think the first major plus is that there's jobs everywhere now. You don't have to do really a long search to find something that's going to be in your ballpark. Now, whether or not it's in your specific niche, then you got to start digging down a little bit into the job descriptions. But I guess the first level is there are jobs everywhere, specifically in life sciences. Second portion of that is because there is a need for them. There's passive hiring, which is sort of a weird process where it's like, hey, we're just going to be looking, but we're not ready to jump on it. And then there's like, I need someone tomorrow, so I'm ready to hire now. And I think we're looking and seeing more into the I need someone tomorrow market than, hey, if they come along and we can plug them into our team and increase our efficiency, great. No, it's like, we need them now. Please apply now. So I think an employee has a huge upside because there is a need, right? It's funny, they were just talking about Aaron Rodgers on the Packers, and they were saying teams aren't going to give high price for him because they know he wants to leave. There's no need to give a lot because they know he wants to leave anyway. So I think in the same way in a hiring market, if you know the company needs you, you have a lot more leverage on your side, right? So I think employees are first at an advantage with that. Secondly, I think there's a lot of access with technology. I don't love Glassdoor. I feel like they're a little wonky, to be honest, when it comes to job titles and pay. But I do think you have access to so many people through LinkedIn. And if you ask someone their opinion, they'll talk to you about it. I think, I wish more, QA folks would reach out and go, look, I've got 7 years in the industry. This is where I live. And what do you think I should be asking for? And any recruiter worth 2 cents is going to give you free advice. Of course, there's a relationship building there. And so, you see two sides of it. If you look at a bell curve, I think what you see is employees walking in asking for way less than they're worth or way more than they're worth. And it's like, oh, let's find that mid range, right? So I think as an employee, you're very much an advantage because people are hiring. And I think the technology you should use is those around you, whether it's LinkedIn or finding a recruiter that specializes your niche or your area, and having a 10-minute conversation and just going, look, this is what I've done and this is what I'm looking for. What's the ballpark? And they can give you a really accurate number. And I think then if you say, well, I think I want 15,000 more, then at least you're jumping 15K more than what you should be asking. And if they really want you, they'll bring you in. So I think as an employee, again, you're at a major advantage right now because so many people are leaving and there's so many jobs open. But secondly, I think that you really need to know your worth up front. And I think we're going to get more into that, but knowing your worth through connecting with others and then, the Glassdoors and the Indeeds and things like that.
So I have just a couple of follow-up questions that really come from, I know a couple folks who have been going through job searches recently, both in industry and outside of industry. And two things that I've heard several times over is that oftentimes someone has 80%, let's say 80% of the requirements, but might need to be trained in industry. That's not in this industry, but they meet 80 or 85%, and employers are not giving them the time of day. Should we be expecting that we have to have 100% of the job requirements under our belt? Because it seems like with jobs varying from employer to employer, that it would be almost impossible to have 100%.
Yeah.
Across. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think the bigger, let me go back to my experience, I guess. My experience is it's usually a hiring manager that's making that call. So whoever the manager of the team is, and I say this cautiously, but you probably don't want to work for someone who, if your resume doesn't hit 100%, they're going to not even give you a chance. I mean, think about now your job role and what they're going to require of you And then if you don't hit 100% of that, and of course we all want to hit 100%, but just think of the personality that says I have 85%, but you're not good enough. An 85 in college is a B. Once I did my doctorate, you were happy with a B, man. You just wanted to finish. So I think anytime you see a hiring manager who won't give you the time of day, it's probably saving you a lot of grief. Because if you have 85%, that 15%, unless it's some crazy niche market and you are the team lead and you will be training others, and if we're talking like a QA spec or an analyst, and you're going to need a month to catch up, to not give you the time of day is crazy. So, but what I've seen is you'll present candidates to multiple hiring managers, and multiple hiring managers will have different standards. And so if you're directly on the team with someone who says you have 85 to 90% of the requirements, but you don't have the 100, I think you're doing yourself a favor by running away. It's just not worth it.
Yeah.
And I think too, I don't want to, whenever I talk to candidates, never lie on your resume. Never I've had that before when I'm in the middle of an interview and I ask something and the person just sort of freezes, and you both know they really didn't do so much of what they're saying. Let's say a specific bullet point. Never lie on your resume, but I think there is wisdom in tailoring a resume, and highlighting what you did. I tell candidates, you have 35 seconds to get an interview. Make sure your resume pops, right? So I think as an employee, if someone is demanding the 100% and it's not even going to talk to you to begin with, I guess a 15-20 minute chat on the phone, which is always the initial start, 30 minutes. If you can't even get that without 100%, you probably don't want to be there to begin with. It's probably going to be a crazy environment.
So I think you might have just answered the second point that I've been hearing from folks is that, we hear, not just in our industry, but across industries right now, how we're at a time where there's an employee shortage. Oh, we can't find enough talent. There's not enough talent. There's not enough talent. Yeah, I know multiple people who've submitted resumes to many jobs that they are perfectly qualified for, and they just never hear anything back. So it's hard to make the two ends connect in my mind. How can we have this incredible employee shortage, and yet we've got applicants or candidates here that are just never hearing back? What is that about?
So I think it's, and again, with the life science industry, I think people are so busy. Let's say you get something in the mail. The other day I found a letter in my car. I had my Easy Pass in my car. I went through the toll booth, and I guess I didn't read it. And so they sent me a ticket, and I had walked out of the door to go to work, grabbed it, put it in my car. And it was 3 months later, and I had never addressed it. It had just gotten put there, and I just forgot about it. I think that's how candidates work. I think HR teams, I think talent acquisition teams are so overloaded. I think they're working with so many roles, and then you take those roles and you multiply by applicants, and now you have the Red Sea ahead of you, and you're like, where am I going with this? And I think by mistake, unless they are being hounded, just somehow that resume just sort of falls through the cracks until that becomes a priority. And I guess that's sort of a plug for a recruiter. And again, I think it should be a good recruiter, because if it's just money-based or it's just bottom line, then you're forgotten with them too, because you're not really priority of their mind. But I think the reason is just overload. I think everyone in the industry, whether it's TA teams or HR teams or manufacturing teams or hiring managers. And the other thing too is sometimes you'll have fantastic talent acquisition teams who are presenting candidates, and it's just really hard to get the hiring manager on a call, And so is it hard to understand? Yeah, there's probably no direct answer, this is why it happens, right? But I think it's just human error where everyone's just overloaded in life. And whether it's, again, talent teams or the hiring managers, everything gets broken down the shuffle unless it's a priority. And again, going back to the recruiter portion, I think that's why a recruiter is good, because once they submit, they sort of become your advocate, and they go back and check in for you. And they usually have the direct line to the person who's placing the job. So, they have a sort of that, I can give them a call and actually remind them instead of just sending a random email to a random HR department.
Right. Fair enough. Yeah, I love the idea of having an advocate. We all need one. So I want to dig in a little deeper on something you briefly mentioned a few minutes ago, which is around an employee's worth, financial worth, right? And how much they're worth to a company, or value, I guess. So in your experience, do employees typically know their own value? You said some people think, they're well below market. Some people think they're well above market. How well do you think people on a whole actually understand their own value in the marketplace, or understand what and how much to ask for during negotiations with employers?
So I don't like the negotiation portion of hiring. I don't think it's worth it. And others may disagree pretty strongly with me, but at least with my relationships, I don't think it's worth negotiation. I've found with the companies I've worked with, we go in and say, this is what they want. And if you want to give them a chance, go for it. But don't give them a chance and then offer them $17,000 less than what they asked for. And I think sometimes we jump in and we do 3 or 4 interviews and everyone has their time wasted. And then they come out with an offer that they never were going to go with to begin with. And everyone's sort of shocked at the end. And they're going, but I didn't really sign up for this, because no one's really willing to say anything to start with. I think it's New York and is it Oregon or is it Washington that's now requiring salary ranges on jobs. That's probably part of it. That's probably a good thing to do. I think that hurts the employees too, though. Everyone's been advocating for that so strongly, but now you don't have the wiggle room if you want to go higher, because now you're locked into a salary range. So I encourage, it's one of my first questions when I jump on a call with an initial applicant. I say, what do you need to see in order to be interested in this? Don't give me something that's like, $4,000, $8,000, $12,000 more than you're making now. It's not worth it for anybody. Give me a number that you say, wow, this is something I need to see in order to jump on this, because we're not going to waste everybody's time and go through all this if they're not going to offer what you wanted to begin with. So that's where I sort of advocate in the hiring process. I say, give me the number you need to see. And whether that's a range, right? Let's say they say 80 to 100 or 90 to 105, whatever it is. But give me something that you would consider. And then that goes up front to whoever's going to make the call of whether or not this is a good candidate. And if they don't want to move forward, they don't move forward. And that's happened before. They'll say, no, we just can't hit that number. So no one's time is wasted.
Yeah.
And other times I've had ones where we're well outside the salary range higher and they still interview them and give them the job. But at least we knew up front. So nobody stood there going, what just happened at the end of so many hours? And I took PTO for that afternoon to do interviews and they offered me. It's just not worth it. So know your worth up front. And again, plug back into recruiting. I think that's where a niche recruiter can really help you. I think they can say, this is what you're worth from what we see. And you may think you're worth more, and that's perfect. Your personal opinion and individuality is fantastic.
So have you ever had to counsel people in terms of what they believe their role is worth, and what it's actually worth? I mean, because it's great to go in and say, I want 10,000 more than what it's the high end of, whatever this job is posted for, but there are some people, I would say they're not the majority of the people, but there are some people who have this sort of inflated sense of, what their position is worth. And there's no company that's going to meet that need. And they stay either unemployed or they are unable to leave their company. So have you had to counsel any people on that and just kind of like say, hey, reality is this. I understand that you'd love it to be that, but really this is where we are.
Yeah. And I'm really bad at this. I'm not a confrontational kind of guy. A lot of times I get their salaries and I talk with the recruiting team that I'm working with and say, what can we do about this? And usually they're the ones that are going to laugh. They're going to make this guy's out of his mind. There's no way, I usually don't say it. But yeah, I think so. Usually it's said softly. And I think it's our typical human mind, right? You go to a garage sale, right? And there's something you want on the ground for $20 and you're like, I'll give you $5 for it. Yeah. You all know you're willing to pay 15 for it, but I'm going to try for 5. Why wouldn't I?
Right.
And I think that jumps into it sometimes, because when someone's presented with the question, well, how much do you want to make? I just handed you a blank check And now you're thinking, okay, I know I only make 92, but I really want to make 140.
Yeah.
Should it's sort of a catch 22 to where you got to sort of read the person and realize if they're actually asking for that, or if they're shooting for the stars. Do you try to bring them back down to earth, or do you say, no, it's just not worth it to begin with? So I think finding that middle ground where, yes, you can shoot for the stars. That's great. Let's say you're a passive candidate who says, if someone's willing to pay me, 40% more of what I'm making right now, I'd be willing to give them an interview. Or if it's, I need a new job and I want to leave, then that's probably not wise. So there's really no hard and fast rules with any of this, but I think there's wisdom in finding that mid ground and then determining whether you're an active candidate or a passive candidate.
Great idea. Great. Good. Yeah, that's great advice. And I think it does depend on your circumstances, right? Like, I need to get out now, or, hey, I'm just looking around.
Exactly.
You never know. And those are two completely different motivations there. So thinking about all that we just talked about, both on the employer and on the employee side, is there a place to meet in the middle for applicants and employers? Not just money wise, but, all around.
It's so hard because when we say employer, I guess it's hard to define that, right? Because as an employer, are we talking C-suite, right? Because if we're talking C-suite at BMS, they're not really doing anything to begin with, for something as individual as that. So I think the employer meeting in the middle is, again, sorry, I'm going back to this, but moving a freight ship, right? Like actually having to change the course of a company. So yeah, there is, and I think there has to be, and maybe there can be a little more flexibility in HR teams to go past, practical points of bonuses or relocations or yearly bonuses, sign-ons, the whole 9 yards. I think that'd be a portion of it. And I think employees, I think they should walk in knowing their worth. I think that would save everybody time. I know, going back to that point, I think if, let's say we never talk salary and someone making 92 is expecting 140. Well, even if they make you a great offer at 115, you're still insulted because you never talked about it to begin with. So I think we save a lot of time, a lot of hurt from both sides by a lot of transparency. I think flexibility on the employer side and transparency on the employee side would make a lot of headaches go away, So I don't know. I think it would be helpful if employees are more upfront with what they want and employers were a little more flexible with what they're willing to offer. But again, it's moving a freight ship. That's really hard. So does that sort of answer the question?
It does. And I think, to your point, it's one of those topics that both employee and employer almost hate to have that discussion. You can see it when people are chatting, sometimes casually about a position and sometimes in the course of an interview. Sure. It's like, okay, well, now we have to approach this topic, right? They do all the other talking around the qualifications and the experience and the job requirements and whatever first, and then they get to that point. And I agree with you. If everyone knew up front, like, okay, this is the range. Yeah, maybe I can push the envelope a little bit and get them a bit higher, but at least I have a ballpark of what the company's thinking.
And I think, to that really quick, I think in the same way that an employee would jump for a higher salary, an employer should not jump for a lower salary.
Right.
If I can offer them 71, but I know they're worth 85 and they'll accept it, why wouldn't I? There's just no goodwill there. You know what I mean? I think that's why, again, establishing standards up front it just helps everybody.
Yeah, I would agree, because I think that goes back to that whole culture of value, feeling valued, feeling appreciated. And if you find out that you got lowballed and that you're making 15 grand less than
you're walking out,
you're doing the same job, you're not going to stay at that employer for very long, because that's just not going to feel good. You know what I mean? So Justin, what resources are out there to help employees better understand the current market and maybe narrow down some positions that are good opportunities for them?
I think, again, depending on your niche market, there's so many things now, cell therapy and cancer research. And I mean, anything you can think of that's out there, right? Mm-hmm. So I think finding somebody that's in your industry, whether it's a professional or a recruiter, even an HR team, just having a really brief conversation with them. I think LinkedIn has opened so many doors, and people are friendly. I think we want to think that our world's not friendly anymore, but if you reach out and you ask kindly, I think a lot of people will usually give you the time of day. So I think that's your first resource, those around you. And I know companies don't like talking salary in the workplace and something, so maybe go outside of your immediate department or your even company. But
Mhm.
I think that's the first thing. I think Google is your best friend when it comes to jobs and roles and descriptions and specific keywords. Are you looking at on the floor QA or investigation QA? We're talking validation. Are you looking GMP for sterile equipment? Are you looking medical device? Are you looking CSV? Are you looking whatever it is?
Yeah.
I think that really helps. And then of course, Indeed. Indeed's a gold mine when it comes to it. LinkedIn's starting to increase on job postings and what they have. A lot of hiring managers, I think, as an employee, if you're looking for future opportunities, let's say you're looking in the next year, find supervisor and managers at companies in the departments you'd want to go and connect with them on LinkedIn and just start watching their profiles and have some kind of individual connection with them, because you will almost guaranteedly, if they're going to post something, you see it right away. And again, going back to,
Well, just
sorry,
to
go ahead.
network in general, right? To help you not only see what jobs are available, but really a lot of times I would say you might get an interview because you have a relationship, right? And you're able to leverage that relationship to really get your resume maybe to the top of the pile of resumes that come in. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thinking about then this information that employees can gain, can they use that knowledge that they gain of the market to leverage within their existing companies for things like promotions, bonus plans, pay increases? Because I'm thinking, there are a number of people who are perfectly happy to stay where they are, but might like to do a little better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's always wisdom in seeing where the industry as a whole stands. I think we become stagnant when we just stay where we are, right? I remember working with someone who I didn't know until the end, but that was the entire reason they were working with me, which is slightly insulting as a recruiter. But again, they were doing the best they needed for their family. So yeah, I think that will sway teams. I think having a connection within talent or HR and having just an open conversation saying, look, if someone offered me elsewhere, do you think they would up my salary? Because some companies, just won't do it. They see it as,
Yeah. They're like, bye, great, see
yeah,
ya.
exactly. And so why go through all of that and then ruin relationships with a manager because you're trying, and that's the other thing I think we have to consider is when you try to play hardball with your employer, sometimes you lose that goodwill between the two of you. And so now you're not going to want to stay even if they do give you the raise,
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think there's wisdom in seeing what the industry is. I love working with people who let's say don't really know their value. And
Yeah.
so we chat, and the first person I ever placed, it was fantastic. Uh, she started like weeping on the first call because they just blew her away with what they were going to offer, So I think that's the fun of, educating someone who, let's say, has been working hard and has been, increasing their professional background and acumen. And then out of nowhere, they're like, I'm worth so much more. I'm worth 35% more than I thought I was. That's the coolest thing. So I think finding that worth and that's an exciting portion of it. I think I'm going in circles here. I'm forgetting where we originally started. Forgive me.
No, that's great. That's great. Well, we've covered a lot today. And I think that it does provide some perspective for folks out there looking for jobs, as well as for hiring managers or HR recruiters who are looking to hire. And I think that, it won't always be an employee driven market, but it is right now. And so employers need to be a bit more flexible with that. But as we get ready to wrap up today, what last thoughts or action items would you like to leave with our audience, Justin?
I think from the employer side, I think what we originally talked about in the valuing, I think we just, our world as a whole would be a lot more of an enjoyable place if we just value those around us. And I think your team will see exponential efficiency and growth when you value the individual. Because I think as a leader, when you serve those around you, then they want to make you look better. And that sounds selfish, but it's not meant to be. It's that weird dichotomy of as you give, it's given back to you.
Right.
So I think as an employer, the more you can give, the better your company's going to roll. And as a manager, the more you can give. And we didn't talk about this, and I should have brought it up, but think about if the industry standard is $75K for a role and you offer 81, $6,000. That's nothing when you're looking at a large company. And yet they feel so valued because you're paying them more than every other company around. $6,000, it's nothing. You talk about retention, you talk about valuing. So I think as an employer, do the little things, find the things you can do. You can't break your back as a company, but 6,000 is not breaking anyone's back. It's just not. So I think finding those things as an employer, and then as an employee, I think, again, knowing your worth and going into that up front and having the 10-minute conversation at the end of your day on your way home with a recruiter who's going to be more than willing to do that with you. Any recruiter will be. And just saying, hey, this is what I want to do. This is my role. Would you help me sort of figure out what I should be doing and where I should be going? And am I open to relocation? Am I open to this or that? And I think then walking away from that conversation with a whole new understanding of the industry. Because to be honest, if we're saying 2-3 years in one role, you're going to be looking at an individual company and an individual role and an individual paycheck, and you really don't know what the industry looks like. So I think from an employee's point of view, really getting that education from someone who knows what they're doing, or even, again, a peer, and having 3 or 4 conversations and seeing what the industry looks like.
Well said. Thank you again, Justin, for being our guest today. It's great to have some professional insights into today's life science job market.
This was awesome. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it, Stacey.
Of course. Also, I want to give a shout out to our producer,